Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Tuesday. Been a long few days since we were back in court, and the state is finished with rebuttal. We're going to get into that. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. The song The Devil Went Down to Georgia. Charlie Daniels said for the devil's part, he played 7 fiddles plus a unique 8-string fiddle that was strung like a mandolin. If you don't play air fiddle on that song, something's wrong with you. I did not get to go live as much as I wanted to last week in Boise, and I'll tell you why. We did not leave the hallway during breaks or lunch. It was packed, and we were given tickets to get in, but we just wanted to make sure we were on the floor because when they start, you can't get back in until there's another break. And you can't go live or even take selfies on the 4th floor. There was an alibier who wanted to get a selfie. The day we found out they were having another hearing after testimony ended, we all ran upstairs. I looked for her downstairs, couldn't find her, so I'm very sorry. If you're watching, please send me an inbox or an email with your address. I'd like to send you something. I apologize for that. I was looking forward to it, but we lost each other there in the heat of it. So what was my impressions of the jury? Very stoic, very attentive. The first day that I was there, the first witness was Emma Daybell, followed by Garth Daybell, and then Joseph Murray, which is Emma Daybell Murray's husband. It was interesting to hear the testimony, number one. The jury didn't react in big ways to any of that testimony except for Joseph Murray, and we'll get to that in a second. With Emma and Garth, it almost seemed like a couple were annoyed by their testimony. I think that is probably not going to be lost on this jury, that these kids are very faithful to their dad. And you have lots of coworkers that these jurors have heard from, people who saw Tammy the day before she died, people who took clogging and Zumba classes with her, who say she was healthy. I don't think it's a far stretch to think that these kids are under their dad's spell, so to speak. Tammy Daybell's Aunt Vicky, who I adore, was doing an interview, and somebody asked, what would Tammy think about what her kids are testifying to? And I think Vicky had the best answer there was, which is Tammy loved her children, bottom line. And I agree with that. I don't think that their testimony is going to come across as credible, especially when you had that rebuttal witness for Garth, who told this totally different story of Garth finding Tammy alone, couldn't find Chad. That young man has no dog in this fight and no reason to lie. So I'm not worried at all that these jurors are going to have a problem in concluding that Tammy Daybell was murdered. We've just heard from too many people who dispute what 2 people said. I think they can do the math. When Joseph Murray was on the stand, I really did see a couple of jurors look very subtly disgusted, especially when he said things that were clearly very anti-law enforcement. That did not go over well with the jury. It was just good to see a lot of familiar faces this week. Got to catch up with a couple of Lori's jurors that I haven't been able to talk to in person because I was up there for the whole trial last year and clearly couldn't talk to them. It was so good to catch up with everybody there last week, from court staff to alibiers to people just there watching the trial and family of the victims. Just a good group in pursuit of justice. Every person in that courthouse was there for the right reasons. And so you feel like you're surrounded by friends when you're all seeking the same goal, which is justice for these innocent victims. Before they started with the first witness, which is the medical examiner that's previously testified, Dr. Christensen, they did have a hearing about whether or not to allow Janice Olson, the coworker of Tammy's, who says she overheard Tammy say that Chad wanted her to up her life insurance policy. There was some argument back and forth about whether or not she would be permitted to testify. Judge Boyce ruled she could not. So we start with Dr. Christensen, recently retired from the Utah Medical Examiner's Office. He goes through about how he gathers information from medical records, interviews with family, things like that, to get a better understanding when there's no clear cause of death. He looked at Tammy's medical records, and when an autopsy is negative, they request those medical records for any clues as to the cause of death. He got additional reports from law enforcement, from the coroner, the deputy coroner there in Idaho, reports from the attempted shooting, background information about Tammy's health from people who knew her, with the exception of her kids. He got medical records from the Teton Clinic and Seasons Medical, as well as a clinic in Springville. She was seen there before relocating to Rexburg. The defense witness, Dr. Raven, reviewed reports a lot less than the witness. The witness, as we know, did not even look at Tammy's medical records when going over her case. He said if he looked at what she did, he may have come to the same conclusion. Remember, she said she would have marked that an undetermined death, but he dug deeper. They go over the external injuries on Tammy, the bruises on the arms, and the one on the chest. Everything was normal with her organs, her brain, her heart. There were no significant pathology issues. The pulmonary edema, he explains it in depth. It's really fluid leaks from small vessels that accumulate. There's a short list of possible causes of death when there's not an obvious one: a cardiac arrhythmia, a seizure, asphyxia, drug intoxication. Those are the main one when there is no anatomic cause of death. They started Tammy's toxicology with a very broad panel. Again, nothing in there that would have explained her passing. Another cause would be seizures, and they assessed that. They reviewed medical records, and there was no history of any seizures, and it's not a likely cause of death. Cardiac arrhythmia, her heart was normal. That left asphyxia. There were no negative interactions of homeopathic remedies or antidepressants as a cause of her death. Emma Daybell testified she was recently diagnosed with sleep apnea and wondered if her mom maybe had the same thing, but the medical examiner said there was no evidence of sleep apnea. It can be associated with sudden death, but mainly for someone who has significant obesity and heart disease. And he reiterates Tammy Daybell was not obese. They also touched on that colloidal silver that she was taking played no role in her death. His opinion as to the cause and manner have not changed: asphyxia and homicide. On cross, John Pryor, on the same day of the autopsy and reburial, you requested information from law enforcement. What did you ask for? The witness doesn't remember specifically, but he did get a lot of information. Then Pryor asks if he knows about confirmatory bias. The witness corrects him and says it's confirmation bias. He says if you're given facts and then you go outside of those facts to get information, that may or may not influence your decision. The witness says at some point along the process of making a decision, you come to a conclusion. And then you look into things that confirm or don't confirm that opinion. Pryor asked about the medical records the witness examined and asked how long it took him to go through what law enforcement gave him. He said a bunch of hours. He hadn't made a decision on a cause of death. And at the end of the day, it was between undetermined and homicidal asphyxia. Pryor says, so you lean to homicide? And the witness says yes. Pryor asked if he talked to Emma, Leah, Garth, Mark, Seth, or Tammy's mom and dad. No. Pryor says, so you didn't look into what the family had to say, and the witness says nothing was provided. They didn't come forward, and Pryor says, you didn't ask? The witness says no. Pryor asked what date he made his determination about the cause and manner of death. He asked if it was 13 or 14 months after the autopsy, and the witness said yes. Pryor asked why he didn't bring up the inflammation in Tammy's lungs, and the witness says it wasn't significant. Pryor says you don't know about the inflammation in her lungs at her time of death, and that could be a reasonable explanation of the fluid. The witness says there wasn't enough fluid to account for the pulmonary edema in there. Just shot Pryor down every time. The witness goes on to explain that inflammatory cells are normal functions in lungs. They fight intruders, prevent infections, and there was no significant amount of inflammation in Tammy Daybell's lungs. Pryor says, you talked about inflammation in the lungs in the autopsy. There was more than a little inflammation. The witness said he would have to refer to his report. Pryor did not bring that in. He goes on to say, you didn't mention inflammation in the lungs when you previously testified. He said no. He asked, when the prosecution calls you after the defense rests, there's an objection that's sustained. Then he says, the second time you're back, inflammation in the lungs comes up? Yes. On redirect, Lindsay Blake, are you familiar with the state bringing people back as rebuttal witnesses? The witness is like, yep. They go on to talk about the inflammation in the lungs. Is there any indication that caused Tammy's death? No. There are no signs inflammation would cause the pulmonary edema. The witness says that was his recollection. She asked, do you request reports if the cause of death isn't readily apparent? And that's what you did in this case. The witness says yes. The state asked, would it surprise you to learn his kids refused to talk to law enforcement? The witness says it wouldn't surprise me. It's their right. And he also adds he never got statements from any of the kids. She asked the witness anything that would cause you to change your opinion? Nope. He says the manner of death was homicide. The next witness, David Stubbs. Interesting stuff here. They talk about Chad's Gmail warrants, search history records. They found things related to turning location data off the phone. First time we've heard about this. January 3rd of 2019, there was a search how to turn off location or GPS on an iPhone. Users can request to have their location data deleted. With Google, you go into your user account and request to not be tracked. And you can also ask that all past data be retracted from their records in Maps, Gmail, phone calls, etc. And guess what? August 24th, 2019, there was a request from Chad's Gmail to have all location and GPS history deleted. The form they got was an Excel spreadsheet from Google showing that. The request to have all location services deleted obviously caught his eye. That deletion range, they say it goes back to 1970. Computers commonly use this date format because, none of us were walking around with cell phones in 70. If you didn't have a quarter, you were out of luck. He was able to click on the items that were searched. He clicked on the ones in the exhibit that they showed in court, which took him to web pages viewed by Chad. It was just specific instructions on how to turn location services off on an iPhone. On cross, Pryor brings up that January 3rd, 2019 date. Pryor asks, are you aware Chad has an Android device? And the witness says yes. Pryor points out Tammy had an iPad. The witness, not sure. Pryor says on January 3rd, an iPhone doesn't mean they're looking up how to turn off an Android. And you're aware he didn't have an Apple device. The witness says, I know he had an Android. We should also point out the number of burner phones these people had. 60 plus is the number I heard. January 3rd of 2019, Pryor points out this is around the time when Chad started his affair with Lori. So it's not unusual for someone having an affair to hide location data. He said that could be the case, of course. As far as the request for Google, the user was asking how to turn all those off using Apple devices. It doesn't mean you're turning off all your locations on different devices. The witness says, I speculate they're referring to one device. Pryor also points out, we don't know who was using Chad's account. The witness says, I can only go by the name on the account. Pryor asked, do you know Tammy Daybell was the computer person in the family? The witness is like, I don't know that. Pryor says, it's not unusual to do a deletion of your search history. And Pryor says, if you're having an affair when that person is moving to Idaho, you might want to delete your history to cover your tracks. And there's no way to know who did that. The witness says no. Redirect. Chad and Lori were having an affair. Did Lori have an iPhone? Yes. They talk about covering the tracks of an affair. Could someone delete location data also to cover the tracks involving crimes, which include missing kids? Is that a good reason to delete location data too? The witness says yes. The last witness, one of the sweetest men I've ever met, Lt Hermisillo, started looking for JJ on November 26th of 2019 at that welfare check. Bodies recovered June 9th of 2020 in Chad's backyard. They talk about Emma Daybell Murray, daughter of Chad Daybell. He did see Emma at the gym early on in the investigation. That was before the discovery of the kids. He did not approach, talk to her, work out by her, or ask questions. They move on to Emma and Joe's claims of Lieutenant Hermisillo driving by the Daybell property. He said it's part of the investigation. Also, he has a dry cleaning business a quarter of a mile past the Daybell property, and also family live in the area. He said mainly it was an active investigation is why he drove by. He did drive by before and after the kids were found. She asked if he drove by twice a week. He says no. Then, can you remind us what was found on that property? Lieutenant Hermisillo says J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Where was Tammy Daybell when she died? He says Chad's bedroom. The state says so. All three at the Daybell residence? Yes. Guess who didn't cross-exam? John Pryor. And that's it. Closings will be mid-morning tomorrow. Come watch live with us alibiers. Maybe a verdict tomorrow. We will see. And then I'll have a day off to get ready for CrimeCon. Driving up on Thursday. Can't wait to see all y'all there. Come see me and my folks. We'll be at a table kind of near the main entrance. Got some goodies for y'all. It's here. After all this time, y'all, closings tomorrow for Chad Daybell, and we're about to close this chapter on justice. Feels good, but let's get this verdict in so we can all exhale, even though I have no doubt of what that verdict's going to be. Then Lori Vallow, you're next, Arizona. Until tomorrow, hope you guys have a good rest of your afternoon. We will see you soon.